A quiet morning jog turned into a life-changing moment when Keanu Reeves heard a piano melody so heartbreaking it stopped him mid-step. In the middle of an empty park, a blind 12-year-old girl played Chopin with a depth no child should understand. But what Keanu discovered next would challenge everything he believed about talent, destiny, and second chances. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The fog lingered thick and low over the city park, the kind of morning haze that muffled every sound and softened the edges of the world. Keanu Reeves moved through it with an easy, steady pace, keeping to the familiar path he had run for years. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs, but the quiet made it worth it. These early runs were the one part of his day untouched by the noise of the world. No cameras, no schedules, no expectations, just the muted rhythm of sneakers on damp pavement and the slow awakening of a sleeping city. But on this morning, something broke through that quiet in a way he couldn't ignore. At first, he thought he imagined it a faint vibration in the air that didn't belong to the usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves. He slowed his jog, trying to place the sound. It drifted in and out of the fog like a whisper, a melody, soft, unsteady, trembling at the edges, a single line of music played on a piano that should not have been there. Not at this hour, not in an empty park before sunrise. Keanu stopped completely. He stood still listening. The melody grew clearer as the wind shifted. It was Chopin, a nocturne, one of the gentlest pieces ever written, but what he heard wasn't gentle at all. It carried a weight that pulled him forward, urging him to follow even before he realized he was moving. The notes rose and fell with a kind of shaky bravery, as if the person playing was pouring every memory, every scar, every quiet ache into the keys. He walked off the running path and toward the old public piano that had sat near the park's center for decades. Most days it was ignored, a relic left behind by some long-gone city program meant to encourage creativity. Sometimes teenagers pounded random chords on it for fun. Sometimes it sat silent for weeks at a time. But today, the piano wasn't just alive, it was speaking. As Keanu drew closer, the fog thinned just enough for him to see the shape sitting at the piano bench. Small, still, focused. The figure leaned slightly toward the keys, head turned up as if listening not to the instrument, but to the world around it. A child. He took a few more quiet steps, cautious not to disturb the moment. Then he saw her face. A young girl, maybe 12 years old. Her eyes didn't follow the motion of her hands. They didn't track his approach. They didn't anchor to anything at all. They were open but distant, unfocused, holding a peaceful kind of stillness. Keanu immediately understood. She wasn't looking at the keys. She wasn't looking at the world. She couldn't. Yet her fingers moved with such impossible precision that it made the entire scene feel unreal. Her hands glided across the keyboard with a gentleness that carried more truth than technical perfection ever could. Each note felt like it belonged to a story she hadn't told yet, a story she had lived far too deeply for her age. Keanu's breath left him in a slow cloud of white. He didn't move closer. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood there, struck by a feeling he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the beauty of the music. It was the emotion inside it. A kind of longing he recognized, a kind of loss he understood. It was as though this small girl was reaching for something she had never seen, but somehow remembered. He had stumbled into something private, something sacred, something meant for the quietest corners of the world, and he knew instantly that this moment was going to change something inside him. Keanu stayed where he was rooted to the ground by the quiet power of the performance. The fog curled around the piano, swirling like a curtain drawn just for her. Each time her fingers pressed the keys, he felt the sound echo in his chest, soft but certain, fragile yet fiercely alive. The park was still empty. No footsteps, no dogs barking, no joggers passing by. It felt as if the universe had paused so he could witness this one sliver of humanity that almost no one else would have seen. The girl's posture was delicate, but her hands moved with confidence. She didn't hesitate or search for notes. She knew exactly where she was on the keyboard, despite never once looking down. Her face remained calm, almost serene, but there was something in her slight frown, in the gentle tension in her jaw, that told Keanu she wasn't just playing a piece of music. She was remembering something. She was feeling something. She was losing herself in a world only she could access. As the song progressed, the emotion deepened. The final measures of the nocturne rose in a slow, aching climb before falling back into quiet resolution. Each note sounded like a confession. Each chord felt like a question the world had never answered for her. Keanu's heartbeat matched the rhythm, steady but heavy. He had heard world-class pianists play Chopin with flawless precision, but none of them had played it like this. None had stripped it down to the bare human ache hiding beneath the sheet music. When the last note drifted into silence, the air felt different, thicker, still full of something too fragile to touch. The girl let her hands rest above the keys for a few seconds. Her chest rose and fell with the softest breath, as if she were returning from somewhere far away. Then she lowered her hands into her lap and tilted her head slightly, listening to the space around her rather than looking at it. Keanu waited for her to move, but she didn't. She didn't stand. She didn't reach for anything. It was as though she wasn't sure if the world had received her music or if she had just sent it into nothingness. He took one quiet step forward. The slightest shift of air made her turn her head. Her brows lifted not in fear but in curiosity. She parted her lips to speak, hesitated, then said softly that she hoped she had not bothered him. Her voice carried a kind of careful politeness, the kind children learn when they grow up, feeling like they take up too much space. Her question hit him with unexpected force. He thought of all the people in life who make noise without knowing it, who fill the room with their presence and demand attention. And here she was, someone who made something beautiful, asking if it was a disturbance. He gently told her no, that she hadn't disturbed him at all. If anything, he felt she had given him a moment he didn't know he needed. He said he wasn't sure if she could sense it, but her playing had stopped him in his tracks. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, almost shyly, she smiled. It was small and cautious, but genuine, like a petal opening after a long winter. Keanu realized then that she wasn't just talented, she was extraordinary. And yet she sat there without a hint of awareness of her own brilliance, as though her gift was just something she carried quietly, hoping the world wouldn't notice. He knew he had to stay. Something told him that walking away from this moment would be like turning his back on a message meant only for him. Keanu stepped closer, careful not to startle her, but the girl seemed to sense his movement before he made a sound. She lifted her chin slightly, turning her face toward him, as if she could read the air he carried with him. Her pale eyes held a softness that made the fog around them feel warmer. She asked whether he had been standing there long, her voice quiet, unsure, almost afraid of the answer. Keanu told her that he had heard her from across the park and that her music had stopped him without his permission. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, surprised that anyone would listen to her this closely. He sat on the edge of the bench, not too near giving her space, but showing he wasn't leaving. The morning light grew brighter, pushing through the fog just enough to outline her small frame. She brushed her fingers lightly across the keys one more time, as if checking that the piano was still there, still real. Keanu watched her hands, watched the way she touched the world with such gentle certainty, and felt something shift inside him. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew this moment mattered. Lily kept her hands resting lightly on her lap, fingers curled as if still holding the last note she had played. Keanu didn't speak right away. He didn't want to break the fragile calm surrounding her. The morning fog wrapped around the piano like a thin blanket, and for a moment it felt as though the two of them were suspended in a world where only music existed. The quiet was delicate, almost sacred, and Keanu feared even shifting his weight on the bench might disturb it. Lily seemed to feel the stillness too. She turned her face toward him, her expression gentle, uncertain, and asked again in a soft voice whether she had disrupted his morning. Her tone held the kind of worry that came from years of being careful not to trouble anyone, from growing up learning to apologize before knowing if she had done something wrong. He assured her she hadn't bothered him at all. He told her that the only thing she had done was make him stop running. She tilted her head slightly, recognizing the sincerity in his voice. She said she couldn't see him, but she felt like he was smiling. The guess made Keanu smile even more. He introduced himself simply as Keanu, without mentioning anything beyond his name. She repeated it softly, almost tasting the sound of it, then introduced herself as Lily. Her name fit her. There was something delicate yet resilient about her presence, a quiet strength hiding beneath gentleness. She adjusted her posture on the bench, keeping her hands folded, but tapping one thumb lightly against her palm, a small habit that hinted at nerves. Keanu asked how long she had been playing. Lily hesitated, as if embarrassed by the answer, then said she didn't know the exact number of years because she had never taken real lessons. She explained that her parents worked long hours cleaning buildings downtown. They left early in the morning and returned late at night, often exhausted, often stretching every dollar just to get by. Piano lessons were a luxury they could never afford. She told him she learned by feeling the keys, tracing the spaces between them, until her fingers memorized the geography of the instrument. She listened to old recordings from the library borrowed and returned so many times that the staff eventually told her she could keep a few. She would sit in her small bedroom with the volume turned up, learning each song by heart, trying to imagine what the pianist felt when they played. Since she couldn't see sheet music, she learned to identify patterns by ear, to feel rhythm through the vibrations in her chest, to map melodies like constellations in a night sky she had never actually seen. As she spoke, Keanu watched the way her hands moved, as though the stories she shared lived in her fingers. He could hear the honesty in her voice, the quiet truth of a child who had built her own world out of sound, because the real world didn't always make space for her. Lily said music was the place she went when the world felt too dark, too loud, or too far away. It was the only place where she didn't feel blind. It was the one place where she felt whole. Keanu listened without interrupting, absorbing every word, every small breath, every shift in her tone. She wasn't just telling him how she learned, she was revealing how she survived. Lily shifted slightly on the bench, brushing her fingertips along the edge of the keys as if grounding herself. She said she had always loved the feeling of smooth wood beneath her hands. She liked how the piano stayed in one place, dependable and steady, never surprising her with sudden shadows or shapes she couldn't anticipate. She told Keanu she could sense when someone approached because footsteps carried vibrations and movements changed the air. She confessed she had known he was there before he spoke, not by sound, but by feeling. Keanu found himself holding his breath at the depth of sensitivity she had learned to navigate the world with. He asked if her parents ever heard her play. Lily nodded, smiling at a memory. She said her mother once cried when she heard her practicing late at night. Her mother had thought the sound was coming from a radio, until she found Lily sitting at a tiny keyboard someone had thrown out. Lily repaired it by pressing the loose wires together until it worked. She didn't tell her mother how she had fixed it because she didn't want her to worry. She said her parents always told her she had a gift, but they didn't know how to help her use it. Keanu listened, feeling a familiar heaviness in his chest, the kind that came from seeing someone with enormous potential trapped by circumstances they never asked for. He asked how she managed to learn pieces as complex as Chopin without ever reading a single line of sheet music. Lily answered calmly, explaining that she listened to the recordings dozens of times, memorizing the rise and fall of each note. She ran her fingers across the piano keys without pressing them, imagining the sound as she mapped the song in her mind. She said some songs felt like colors. Chopin felt blue to her, soft but deep. River flows in You Felt Silver, bright but calm. She said she didn't know if anyone else heard music that way, but for her, sound had always been more than sound. It was shape, texture, emotion, and memory all at once. Her words moved Keanu. There was something extraordinary about the way she understood the world, not through sight, but through intuition and feeling. He realized then that Lily didn't just play piano. She lived inside the music. She breathed it. She made it real in ways most people couldn't comprehend. She wasn't performing. She was expressing the part of herself the world never got to see. The morning sun began to break through the fog, casting soft gold over her face. The light warmed her skin, even though she couldn't see it. She tilted her head toward the warmth instinctively. Keanu noticed how her posture softened when sunlight touched her. She looked peaceful for a moment, as if the world made sense there, at the edge of dawn. He asked her if she ever wished she could take real lessons. Lily hesitated, then admitted she wished she could, but didn't know how to ask for something so expensive. She didn't want to burden her parents. She didn't want them to think they had failed her. She had learned to be grateful for what she had, even when her dreams felt too big for their small apartment. Lily's honesty left Keanu silent. She had accepted limitations she didn't deserve. She had built her own universe out of sound, because the real one never offered her room to dream. As she spoke, he realized she wasn't just extraordinary. She was carrying her talent alone, and he couldn't walk away knowing that. Lily brushed her fingertips across the keys again, lightly, almost absent-mindedly, as though the piano helped her think. Her small shoulders rose and fell with a quiet breath before she admitted something she had never told anyone outside her family. She said she often wondered who she might be if she had been born different. Not better, just different. Someone who could see the world her parents described. Someone who didn't bump into chairs or walls. Someone who didn't have to count her steps in every room. Someone who didn't have to memorize the sound of every person's breath to recognize them. But then, with a gentleness that caught Keanu off guard, she said she was grateful for music. Because even though she couldn't see the world, she felt she could hear it more clearly than most people could ever imagine. She said music painted pictures for her that no pair of eyes could match. When she spoke, her voice didn't carry resentment, only acceptance and a quiet longing. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest, not pity, something deeper, something like admiration mixed with a protective ache he hadn't expected. Lily wasn't just blind. She was navigating life with a grace far beyond her years and doing it mostly alone. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't ask for help. She simply played, hoping someone might hear something in her music she couldn't say out loud. He told her again how extraordinary her playing was. She shook her head, dismissing the compliment the way kids do when they've never been encouraged enough to believe praise. Keanu realized she didn't understand her own brilliance. She didn't know what she had stirred inside him the moment he heard her first trembling note. And in that moment, he knew she needed someone who believed in her, someone who wouldn't let her talent fade quietly into the background. He knew he was meant to be that person. Keanu shifted closer on the bench, moving slowly so Lily could sense his presence without surprise. He rested his hands on his knees and let the quiet settle before asking her how she learned to play Chopin with such emotion. She turned her face slightly toward the sound of his voice, her expression thoughtful, almost shy. She said she didn't really know how to explain it, that she just felt the music in a way she couldn't describe. She said she loved songs that sounded like someone trying to reach for something they couldn't see. Songs that felt like the world was dark, but still filled with hope if you listened closely enough. She said Chopin sounded like light trying to break through a curtain, like someone finding their way without a map. Her words carried a wisdom far beyond her years. A 12-year-old shouldn't understand longing that deeply. But Lily did. She didn't speak with bitterness or sadness. She spoke with honesty, the kind that only comes from living with challenges quietly, without complaint. Keanu could hear something behind her voice, something tender, something fragile, something that made him feel protective of her in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He asked her if she had ever imagined performing on a big stage, the kind with lights so bright you could feel the heat from them, the kind with an audience so large the sound of their breathing filled the room. Lily let out a small laugh, soft and almost embarrassed. She said big stages were for kids who could read music, who had perfect eyes, who came from families that bought lessons and new clothes and pretty shoes. She said people like her didn't belong on stages like that. People like her listened from the audience, dreamed from the shadows, and clapped for others. She paused, brushing her fingertips over the wooden edge of the piano as if touching the memory. She told him once she watched a music competition on TV. She heard the crowd cheering the judges, praising the young performers, the excitement that filled the room. For a moment, she let herself imagine standing there, letting sound become light inside her. But then she remembered who she was, a blind girl from a small apartment with no lessons, no spotlight, no chance. She said the dream felt so far away that wanting it hurt, so she stopped wanting it. She put the dream in a small corner of her heart, closed the door, and tried not to think about it again. Keanu listened to every word, feeling each one cut deeper than the last. He had met many talented people throughout his life. Some had every resource and still doubted themselves. Others had nothing but talent and still believed they deserved the world. Lily was something else entirely. She had a gift bigger than she realized, yet she carried it like a secret she wasn't sure the world wanted to know. She wasn't angry about it. She had simply accepted that life didn't give everyone the same doors to walk through. She learned to live with the ones she had. And as he listened, something inside Keanu shifted. He had seen pain before. He had lived through loss and heartbreak and struggle. But the quiet kind of pain, the kind a child carries alone to avoid burdening others, was the kind that always broke him the most. Lily kept tracing the edge of the piano with her fingertips as if the familiar shape steadied her while she spoke. She said some dreams feel too bright to look at for long, even for someone who can't see. She told Keanu she would sometimes imagine herself on a stage, not because she believed it could happen, but because imagining it made her heart feel warm for a few seconds. She would picture the vibration of applause, the echo of her own playing filling a room instead of a park or her bedroom. But every time she allowed the daydream to grow, reality followed right behind it, reminding her of everything she didn't have. Lessons, money, confidence, vision. And the dream shrank again. Keanu stayed quiet, letting her speak at her own pace. He noticed how gently she handled her own sadness, as though she had learned to fold it neatly and tuck it away so the world wouldn't see it. She told him that when she was younger, she used to ask her mother about stages and concerts, wanting to know what they looked like. Her mother would describe the lights, the colors, the curtains, the crowd. Lily would listen smiling, imagining it all in her head. But after a while, she stopped asking. Not because she didn't care anymore, but because she didn't want her parents to feel guilty about the things she couldn't have. Keanu felt a slow ache spreading through him. Lily wasn't just blind. She was careful with her dreams in a way no child should have to be. She had learned to expect less so she wouldn't be disappointed. She had learned to make her world smaller so the cracks in it didn't hurt as much. But even as she shrunk her dreams, the music inside her never shrank with them. He asked her if she ever played for anyone besides her parents. She shook her head lightly. She said most people didn't stop to listen. Sometimes a stranger paused at the park, but they usually moved on quickly. She said she didn't mind because she didn't think she was worth stopping for. She said she played because it gave her peace, not because she expected anyone else to care. That sentence settled in Keanu's chest like a weight he didn't want to let go of. He told her again how incredible she was, but she gave him another small shrug, the kind that said she appreciated the words but couldn't absorb them. Lily explained that it felt strange when someone complimented her because it didn't feel real. She wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't used to her talent being recognized. She played in the dark, lived in the dark, dreamed in the dark, and had grown used to believing the world didn't need anything from her. Keanu studied her face, the peaceful stillness in her eyes, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened to him as though she was painting a picture of him through sound. He couldn't understand how someone so gifted could believe she wasn't worth a moment of someone's attention. He couldn't understand how the world had let a child carry so much doubt in silence. He felt something shift deeper inside him, something like a quiet vow forming. Lily had lived with her dreams tucked away for too long. She had accepted a life smaller than the one she deserved, and Keanu felt with absolute certainty that he could not let her keep believing she belonged only in shadows. Lily rested her hands in her lap again, shoulders curling inward the way children do when they try to make themselves smaller. She said softly that big dreams were meant for other people, not for girls who learned music by touch, not for girls who sat on public pianos because they didn't have one at home. She said she didn't want to hope too much because hope could hurt. She had learned that early. Every time she wanted something too deeply, life reminded her of everything she lacked. So she stopped wanting loudly. She kept her dreams quiet, tucked behind the music she played only for herself. Keanu felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. He remembered moments from his own childhood, moments when dreams felt fragile and the world felt too heavy. He understood what it meant to shrink yourself so disappointment couldn't find you. But seeing that same instinct in a girl as young as Lily made something inside him twist painfully. She wasn't choosing a smaller dream because she didn't care. She was choosing it because no one had ever shown her that she deserved more. He told her gently that sometimes the world makes people believe dreams have limits, but those limits are lies. He said talent like hers didn't come along often. She listened quietly, absorbing his tone more than his words. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. She simply folded her hands as if bracing herself against the possibility of believing him. Keanu realized then that Lily wasn't unreachable. She was simply unprotected. No one had guarded her dreams long enough for them to grow. And as he looked at her small frame sitting beside that old piano, he understood with absolute clarity that her life could change if someone stood with her. He knew he was meant to be that someone. Lily reached down to gather her small backpack, the fabric worn thin at the straps, the zipper frayed from years of use. She moved slowly, feeling for the edge of the bench, making sure she didn't knock anything over. It was an instinctive gesture, the kind that comes from living a life where every movement requires caution. She murmured that she should let him get back to his morning, that she had already taken up too much of his time. The way she said it made Keanu's heart tighten. She sounded like someone accustomed to apologizing for existing, someone who believed every minute she spent with another person was a minute borrowed, not given. Before she could stand, Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She stilled immediately, sensing the kindness in the gesture rather than the pressure of it. He told her softly that she hadn't taken anything from him. If anything, she had given him something he didn't expect to find that morning. She turned her face slightly toward him, waiting, unsure whether she should believe that. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, as if preparing to let go only if she heard the right words. Keanu told her that some people spend their entire lives waiting for someone to believe in them. He said most people never get that moment. But she didn't have to wait, not anymore. His voice was calm, steady, carrying a certainty that made her breathe in sharply. She parted her lips, as though she wanted to speak, but wasn't sure what to say. She tightened her grip on the bench, grounding herself in the familiar world of solid objects she could trust. She asked him, her voice caught between hope and disbelief, who would ever give her a chance to stand on a stage like the kids she heard on TV. She said it with a small, awkward laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to hide the fact that a question matters deeply to them. Keanu didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to consider the weight of the promise or the responsibility behind it. He simply answered with one quiet word. "Uncle." Lily froze. Her breath hitched. She blinked, though her eyes couldn't see him, as if trying to adjust to a world that had suddenly shifted under her feet. She asked him softly whether she had heard him correctly. No one had ever offered her a promise that didn't fade after the moment passed. No one had ever spoken about her future with certainty. No one had ever imagined a place for her beyond the borders she had accepted. Keanu repeated it. "Uncle," this time even softer, but with even more conviction. He wanted her to hear the truth of it, not just the sound. He wasn't saying it for effect. He wasn't saying it out of pity. He was saying it because he meant it, because he felt in his bones that he was meant to step into this role in her life. Lily didn't know who he really was. She didn't know she was speaking to someone known around the world, and Keanu liked it that way. He didn't want her to listen to him because of fame or reputation. He wanted her to listen because she deserved someone who believed in her for no other reason than that she was worthy of it. She had talent that outshone most adults, and yet she sat on a park bench thinking every dream she had was too heavy to hold. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she allowed herself to breathe in a little deeper, as if letting his words settle inside her. The possibility of something more, something bigger flickered in her expression. It wasn't confidence yet, it wasn't certainty, but it was the beginning of belief. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future she had stopped permitting herself to dream about. Even if the picture was blurry, even if she couldn't see it, the feeling was enough to make her heart shift toward hope. Lily kept her hands wrapped around the strap of her backpack, holding on as though it anchored her to the moment. She turned her head slightly, trying to interpret Keanu's tone, trying to understand whether this was something real or something she would wake up from. She asked him in a voice barely above a whisper why someone like him would ever want to help someone like her. She wasn't asking out of insecurity alone. She was asking because life had taught her that kindness that big was rare, and when it appeared, it usually came with conditions. Keanu didn't answer right away, not because he hesitated, but because he wanted to choose words that didn't overwhelm her. He told her that talent like hers didn't come around often. He told her that the way she played wasn't ordinary. It was full of emotion most adults couldn't express even with years of training. He said she carried something special in her hands, something bright and rare, something the world deserved to hear. He said she didn't need to see the world to change it. She only needed someone to open the door she had been told didn't exist. Lily listened intently, absorbing every note of sincerity in his voice. She didn't say anything at first. She let his words settle slowly, as though her heart needed a moment to adjust to something that warm. She finally admitted that no one had ever talked about her music that way. People said it was nice, pretty, sweet. But no one had ever suggested it mattered. No one had ever told her it could take her anywhere. She confessed she didn't know what it meant to be believed in because she had never experienced it before. Keanu's chest tightened. He could hear the quiet ache in her voice, the years of being unseen, the weight of dreams she had folded away because life had taught her to dream quietly. He wanted to take that weight from her. He wanted to show her that the small life she had been limited to wasn't the only one she deserved. He wanted to protect the spark he had heard in her, playing the spark that reminded him what it meant to feel alive. He asked her gently what she would do if someone handed her a real chance, if a stage, a spotlight, or an audience were suddenly within reach. Lily didn't know how to answer. She fumbled for words, her fingers tightening around her backpack strap. She said she would probably be too scared, too overwhelmed, too unsure of herself. But then she added something small, something fragile. She said that maybe if someone believed she could do it, she might try. That was all he needed to hear. Keanu smiled, not a big or dramatic smile, but one full of calm certainty. He told her she didn't need to worry about the how or the fear or the unknown. She only needed to take one small step, and he would help with the rest. She didn't have to do any of it alone. He had seen what she could do without guidance. He couldn't imagine what she might become with support. Lily exhaled slowly, the air trembling with a mix of relief and disbelief. Her shoulders softened, the tension in her jaw eased. It was as if a door she had kept tightly shut for years creaked open, letting in a small sliver of light. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no, but she didn't pull away from the possibility either. And that was enough to tell him she wanted this more than she could admit out loud. Lily loosened her grip on the backpack strap, her fingers relaxing in small, hesitant motions. She asked quietly what she was supposed to call someone who made promises like the one he had just made. Keanu didn't overthink it. He simply repeated the word he had said before, the one that had made her world pause. Uncle. The word lingered between them, gentle but full of meaning. Lily pressed her lips together as if testing how the word felt in her heart rather than her voice. No one had ever stepped into her life with that kind of certainty. No one had ever offered her a dream without asking for anything in return. For a moment she sat perfectly still, then let out a soft, trembling breath. It wasn't quite acceptance, not yet, but it was the first moment she let herself believe that maybe she wasn't dreaming. Keanu walked out of the park with a different kind of purpose in his stride. The morning fog had thinned, but the weight of what he had just promised stayed with him like a steady pulse beneath his ribs. Lily's soft voice, her careful questions, her hesitant hope echoed through his thoughts with every step. He knew promises meant nothing without action. If he was going to call himself her uncle, even in the quiet, symbolic way he meant it, then he had to become someone she could rely on, someone who kept his word, someone who opened doors where she had only seen walls. By the time he reached home, his coffee had gone cold, and the sun had brightened the sky into pale gold. He didn't bother changing out of his running clothes. He dropped onto his kitchen chair, pulled out his laptop, and began searching. He typed in phrases like piano lessons for visually impaired children, and music instructors for blind students, and specialized sensory training for blind pianists. Dozens of websites appeared, but most felt generic or outdated. He clicked through articles, old interviews, archived programs. Some names appeared repeatedly, but none seemed right. Lily needed someone patient, someone brilliant, someone who understood not only music, but the emotional world she lived in. As he scrolled deeper into older blogs and forgotten directories, he suddenly remembered a name he had come across years earlier when helping with a charity project involving adaptive arts programs. Professor Samuel Hartman, a retired pianist known for mentoring young blind composers and instrumentalists, an old master of sensory mapping techniques, a man whose students often described him as someone who taught them how to hear color and feel emotion through sound. Keanu paused, searching his memory until the details sharpened. He remembered watching a documentary clip of Hartman guiding a blind teenager as she learned to navigate complex harmonies using vibration alone. The professor wasn't intimidating or theatrical. He was calm, wise, and deeply respectful of the students he worked with. He didn't see their limitations, he saw their potential. Keanu typed the name into the search bar. It took a few minutes to find current information, but eventually he tracked down a small, outdated website with a list of Hartman's past projects and an address in a quiet neighborhood not far from the city. No fancy studio, no music school, just a modest apartment where the professor continued teaching those who sought him out. Keanu didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, slipped into a jacket, and headed out. The drive was short, but his mind raced. He thought of Lily's face when he said the word uncle. He thought of the way she clutched her backpack as if it was the only thing that belonged fully to her. He thought of how quickly she had dismissed her own dreams, how carefully she protected herself from disappointment. He wanted to change that. He wanted her to feel the world expanding rather than closing in. The building where Hartman lived was old but well cared for, with ivy climbing along the brick and a narrow walkway leading to the entrance. Keanu climbed the stairs to the second floor and found the door with the faded number 2B. He knocked gently, hearing the faint shuffle of footsteps from inside. After a long pause, the door opened, and an older man with silver hair and soft, perceptive eyes looked up at him. He recognized Keanu immediately, but welcomed him without fanfare, stepping aside to let him in. And for the first time that morning, Keanu felt the promise he made begin to take shape. Professor Hartman's apartment was small, but warm, filled with the smell of old books and polished wood. Sheet music covered the coffee table in uneven stacks, though none of it appeared new. A well-worn upright piano stood against the far wall, its surface scratched and faded, but the keys gleamed as if they were cleaned every evening. The professor walked slowly, a slight stiffness in his stride, yet his presence carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime in deep conversation with music. He motioned for Keanu to sit. Keanu chose the edge of a simple wooden chair, unsure how to begin. There was something grounding about the professor's home, something that reminded him of all the people in his life who had offered him guidance without ever demanding anything in return. He introduced himself politely, but Hartman waved off the formality with a gentle smile. He said he knew who Keanu was, but he also knew that famous names often hid deeper stories. He asked what brought him there. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Without giving context first, he asked if the professor would be willing to listen to something. Hartman raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not surprised. It wasn't the first time someone had brought him a recording. It was, however, usually parents, not actors. When Keanu pressed play, the room filled with the fragile, trembling beauty of Lily's Chopin Nocturne. Hartman's expression changed almost instantly. His eyes softened in the way a person's eyes soften when they recognize something rare. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and closed his eyes to listen more deeply. When the first 30 seconds finished, he asked Keanu to play it again. Keanu did. When the second repetition ended, he requested a third. His voice grew quieter each time, as if he didn't want anything to interrupt the moment. During the third playback, he didn't move at all. He simply listened, breathing slowly, letting every note settle in the space between them. When the music faded, Hartman opened his eyes and exhaled, as though he had been holding something inside his chest. He said the girl's technique was raw but instinctive. He said she played like someone who had lived too much feeling for her age, someone who understood darkness but still carried softness in her hands. He said her performance felt like honesty, and honesty couldn't be taught, only shaped. Keanu felt relief wash over him. For the first time since making his promise to Lily, he felt certainty settle in his bones. This was the right place. This was the right person. Hartman asked how old she was, how she learned what she could and couldn't see. When Keanu explained that Lily was blind, self-taught, and had never taken a single formal lesson, the professor leaned back in astonishment. He said her instinctive precision was almost unheard of. To map Chopin's phrasing without sight or instruction meant she had a rare musical intuition, a natural painter of emotion. Then Hartman did something Keanu hadn't expected. He asked when he could meet her. Keanu felt a small, grateful smile pull at his lips. He told the professor he didn't want to overwhelm her. She didn't yet understand what she carried in her hands. Hartman nodded knowingly. He said the girl wouldn't be overwhelmed. She would be understood, maybe for the first time. Then, without hesitation, he told Keanu that he would teach her for free. Not as charity, but because talent like hers deserved a guardian. And Keanu knew those words were exactly what Lily had needed her whole life. Keanu sat quietly for a moment, letting the professor's promise settle in the room. It felt like the first solid piece of the future he wanted for Lily. Hartman closed the lid of the piano gently, as if sealing an agreement neither of them needed to put into words. He asked when Keanu planned to bring her. Keanu said he wanted to move at her pace to make sure she felt safe and supported, not pushed. Hartman nodded, understanding that children like Lily needed trust as much as instruction. Before Keanu left, the professor placed a hand on his arm. He said that some students came with talent, others with discipline, and a rare few with a kind of emotional truth that could not be taught. Lily, he said, belonged to the rare few. He told Keanu that believing in a child at the right moment could change the entire direction of their life. When Keanu stepped back outside, the afternoon light felt different, warmer, more certain. He felt something inside him steady. The first step of his promise to Lily was no longer just hope. It was real, and he couldn't wait to tell her. Keanu returned to the park the next morning earlier than usual, unsure whether Lily would be there, but hoping she would be. The fog was lighter than the day before, stretched thin across the grass like a fading veil. As he approached the familiar path leading to the public piano, he saw a small figure already seated on the bench. Lily sat with her hands resting lightly on the keys, not playing yet, just waiting. She turned her head slightly when she sensed footsteps approaching, and the soft smile that crossed her face told him everything. She had come back hoping the stranger with the warm voice would return. She greeted him with a simple good morning, her voice brighter than the sunlight beginning to filter through the trees. Keanu sat beside her again, careful and gentle, letting the silence settle before speaking. When he told her he had found someone who wanted to teach her, she stiffened for a moment, as if her heart had skipped a beat. Then her expression bloomed with a joy so pure, so unexpected, that he felt his own chest warm at the sight of it. She lifted her face toward him, disbelief and wonder mixing together, and asked if he meant real lessons, the kind with a teacher who knew how to train someone like her. He nodded. The excitement on her face grew in waves she couldn't hide. She didn't know how to thank him, not with words, so she reached out hesitantly until her hand found his. When she realized what she had done, she tried to pull back, embarrassed, but Keanu gently closed his fingers around hers. She held on to him tightly without shame this time, holding on to the truth of what his help meant. For a long moment they sat like that, her small hand in his, the morning around them warm and quiet, her emotions almost tangible. When she finally let go, she wiped at her cheek with the back of her sleeve, flustered by her own tears. She said she hadn't cried in front of anyone for a long time. Keanu told her there was nothing wrong with feeling something deeply. Later that afternoon, he picked her up from the park again, her backpack slung over her shoulder and a mixture of nerves and excitement in her posture. She asked questions the whole walk, what the professor was like, whether he would be strict, whether she would disappoint him. Keanu answered each one calmly, reassuring her that the only thing she needed to bring was her heart and her music. Everything else would come in time. When they reached Professor Hartman's apartment, Lily hesitated at the threshold. Keanu placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently inside. The moment Hartman saw her, his expression softened even more than it had while listening to her recording. He introduced himself warmly, speaking slowly so she could track his voice easily. She lifted her face toward him, unsure but eager, and greeted him with the kind of shy politeness she used when meeting someone she wanted to impress. Hartman asked if she was ready to begin. Lily nodded, though her fingers trembled slightly. The professor guided her to the piano with patient steps, watching how she reached forward to sense her surroundings. Keanu stayed behind her, giving her courage just by being present. This was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had words for yet. But Lily could feel it. Keanu could feel it. A door was opening for her, and she was stepping into the light for the first time. Professor Hartman began gently wanting to understand how Lily interacted with the piano before introducing anything new. He invited her to sit at the bench, and she settled into place with the familiarity of someone who knew the instrument by touch better than many knew it by sight. Her hands hovered above the keys, unsure whether to begin. Hartman encouraged her to play anything she wished, something small, something natural. Lily hesitated for only a breath, then brought her fingers down, softly shaping a few tentative notes before slipping into a melody she had memorized long ago. The room grew still. Hartman stood beside her, listening with the quiet concentration of someone studying a rare phenomenon. He watched the rise of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head slightly toward the sound, as though tracking the shape of the notes in the air. She played without tension, without fear, and with a sensitivity that surprised even him. Her hands moved with a gentleness that felt like truth rather than technique. When she finished, Hartman nodded slowly, not speaking right away. Lily lowered her hands to her lap, waiting nervously for his reaction. He asked her if she could identify individual notes by vibration alone. Lily shrugged a little, explaining that she didn't think about it consciously. She said she felt when something sounded wrong, like when a color didn't belong in a painting. Hartman glanced at Keanu, impressed. It was a metaphor only someone who saw the world through sound would use. He wanted to learn more. He placed a finger on a single key and pressed it softly. Lily tilted her head, immediately naming the pitch with quiet confidence. He pressed 2 notes next spaced far apart. Again, she identified them without hesitation. He moved closer, tapping 3 notes in a slow sequence. Lily smiled shyly. She could hear the pattern before he asked the question. Her talent wasn't chance. It wasn't luck. It was something deeper, something shaped by instinct and sharpened by resilience. Hartman changed tests, asking her to place her hand on the piano lid while he played a small cluster of chords. She felt them through her palm and identified each one with surprising accuracy. He lifted her hand, pressed the notes again, and asked her to describe the emotional tone instead of the pitch. Lily paused, considering. Then she said, "The chords felt heavy but hopeful, like the beginning of a rainstorm that promised sunshine afterward." Hartman breathed out slowly. Keanu could tell he was seeing exactly what he had hoped for, perhaps more. Lily wasn't merely talented. She had an emotional vocabulary for sound that most musicians never developed, even with decades of experience. The professor stepped back, studying her quietly. Lily fidgeted, unsure what the silence meant. She turned her face toward Keanu's direction, sensing his steadiness behind her, and asked timidly whether she had done something wrong. Keanu reassured her immediately that she hadn't. She had impressed the professor far more than she realized. Hartman finally spoke. He told her she wasn't learning piano. She was already speaking through it. He said she played like someone who understood that music wasn't about perfection, but about truth. His voice carried a softness she hadn't expected. She lowered her head, overwhelmed, not knowing how to carry praise, that heavy and sincere. Keanu moved a little closer, letting her feel that she wasn't alone in the moment. She reached back instinctively until her hand found his. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, passing steady reassurance without a single word. Together, they stood at the doorway of a new world she hadn't even known she was allowed to enter. Lily sat quietly on the piano bench, absorbing everything the professor had said. Her fingers tapped nervously against her knee, a small habit she used when she didn't know how to process something important. She whispered that no one had ever told her she was good at anything. Not like this, not with a seriousness that made her feel seen. Hartman placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her that her gift was real and that with guidance it would only grow. She nodded slowly, overwhelmed but glowing with a fragile kind of confidence she wasn't used to feeling. Keanu stayed behind her, steady and silent, giving her space to take in the moment. She reached for him again this time without hesitation, her small hand curling around his, as if anchoring herself to the new future unfolding in front of her. Hartman said they could begin lessons as soon as she felt ready. Lily turned her face toward Keanu, uncertain but full of hope, and asked if he would be there too. He promised he would. Her shoulders relaxed and a soft breath escaped her lips, almost a laugh, almost a sigh of relief. For the first time in her life, she wasn't stepping forward alone. The first week of lessons felt like watching a small flame learn how to breathe. Lily arrived at Professor Hartman's apartment every afternoon with her backpack pressed close to her chest and a quiet determination in her steps. She still hesitated at the doorway, each time still reached for Keanu's arm before taking the first few steps inside. But once she sat at the piano bench, something inside her shifted. Her posture straightened, her breathing steadied. Her hands found the keys with an ease that never failed to amaze Hartman. He began with simple exercises, but even the simplest patterns sounded different when Lily played them. She approached the keyboard as if it were a living thing, listening not only to the notes but to the air between them. Hartman guided her gently, teaching her how to feel the weight of each key, how to let her wrists float, how to let her breathing shape the pacing of a phrase. She absorbed everything with an intensity that surprised even her. The more she learned, the more her confidence grew, though she didn't always know how to show it. Keanu visited whenever he could. Some days he sat quietly in the corner, listening without drawing attention to himself. Other days he stood in the hallway where Lily couldn't sense him, not wanting her to feel the pressure of performing for someone she admired. He became familiar with the sounds of her progress, the slight hesitations that grew shorter each day, the way her chords deepened as her touch improved, the moments when her music carried so much emotion that even he had to close his eyes to steady himself. By the second week, Hartman introduced sensory techniques designed specifically for visually impaired musicians. Lily learned to place one hand on the wooden frame of the piano while playing with the other, feeling the vibrations travel through her palm. She learned how to identify subtle differences in resonance, how to follow the emotional curve of a piece by sensing tension and release through touch alone. She learned to breathe with the music, to let her chest guide the tempo instead of relying on sight. Each new lesson unlocked another part of her ability, something she never knew she could access. Her fingers toughened quickly. She no longer flinched when playing longer sessions. She no longer doubted which direction the melody should flow. Hartman commented more than once that she learned in hours what most students needed weeks to grasp. Lily never knew how to respond to praise that strong. She always lowered her head, hiding a shy smile she couldn't quite suppress. She still didn't believe in herself fully, but the belief of the two people around her was beginning to sink in slow and steady, like sunlight warming a cold room. At home, her parents worked late into the night, cleaning office buildings, often too tired to notice every detail of Lily's progress. But they noticed her happiness. They noticed the way she hummed lightly while washing dishes, the way she sat straighter at the dinner table, the way her hands danced on invisible keys while she talked. When they asked Keanu why he was helping, he answered simply that he was a family friend, supporting their daughter's love of music. He didn't offer more. He didn't want recognition. He only wanted Lily's world to keep opening wider. And it was. By the third week, Lily's transformation became something you could feel the moment she entered the apartment. She walked with a little more certainty, no longer gripping the straps of her backpack quite so tightly. She still reached out for Keanu when stepping through the doorway, but now it was out of habit, not fear. Once she sat down at the piano, she lifted her chin a little higher, as if the instrument itself welcomed her back after a long journey. Hartman noticed the shift too. He began introducing techniques he normally reserved for advanced students. He guided her fingers through complex chord progressions, showing her how to distinguish tension from release, not through sight, but through breath and vibration. She learned to feel music in her ribs, in her shoulders, even in her fingertips when the notes hummed through the piano's internal frame. She practiced until her fingers grew stronger, until the sound she produced carried intent instead of uncertainty. Some afternoons, Hartman played a short phrase and asked her to repeat it. Lily always listened with her entire body, tilting her head toward the sound, absorbing every detail. She rarely missed. When she did, she corrected herself without frustration, as if mistakes were simply guideposts. Her patience impressed him. Her emotional connection to the music astonished him. It wasn't just that she learned quickly, it was that she understood why the notes mattered. Keanu watched these moments quietly, pride building in him with every passing day. He saw how Lily's world expanded every time Hartman praised her. He saw the way her shoulders relaxed when she realized she did something right. He saw how she lifted her face toward the professor's voice with anticipation, hungry for more knowledge, more music, more possibility. It reminded him of the first time someone believed in him when he was young, back when he was still trying to understand who he was and where he belonged. He recognized that same hunger in Lily, a desire to be seen and understood. There were days when Keanu stayed in the hallway so Lily wouldn't feel pressure. He leaned against the wall and listened to the music drifting through the half-open door. Some afternoons, her playing was soft and searching. Other days, it was bold, emotional, almost fierce. He could hear her growth in every note. He could hear the difference between the shy girl he met in the foggy park and the emerging musician discovering her own voice. Hartman often paused between lessons to explain small technical details, brushing Lily's fingertips to adjust her hand shape, or asking her to inhale slowly before striking the first note of a phrase. He guided her with patience that made her feel safe enough to try things she once believed were impossible. When she played a difficult piece correctly for the first time, she turned instinctively toward the sound of Keanu's breath in the background, searching for his reaction. Even without seeing him, she sensed his smile. Her confidence grew day by day. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, steady, like a flame learning to brighten without flickering. The uncertainty in her movements softened. The fear that once lived in her voice began to fade. She started asking questions of her own, wanting to understand not just how to play, but why certain techniques mattered. She was no longer surviving each lesson, she was thriving. And every day, Keanu felt more certain that helping her had been the most important promise he'd made in years. By the end of the month, Lily was no longer the same timid child who once apologized for taking up space. She still moved with caution, still relied on touch and sound to understand her surroundings, but there was a new steadiness in her steps. She arrived at lessons with a quiet excitement she didn't try to hide anymore. Even the way she placed her hands on the piano had changed. Her fingers no longer hovered uncertainly. They landed with purpose, ready to create something she could feel in her bones. Hartman saw it before she did. He told her one afternoon that her progress wasn't normal. It was exceptional. She paused, stunned, unable to absorb the compliment. He repeated it gently, letting the truth settle in the space between them. She blushed, lowering her head, trying not to cry. She asked whether he really meant it. He told her he didn't say things he didn't believe. When Keanu visited that day, he stood quietly near the door as Lily played a piece she had struggled with endlessly during the first week. Now she moved through it with confidence, shaping every phrase with emotion she could barely contain. The small apartment seemed to swell with the sound of her growth, her hope, her transformation. When she finished, she turned her face toward him with a shy expectation, searching for his reaction even though she couldn't see it. He told her it was beautiful. She smiled so widely it softened the entire room. Her parents remained unaware of the full extent of her progress, but they noticed her joy. They noticed how she hummed while packing her backpack each day, how she spoke about music, as if it were a new language finally making sense to her. Lily was changing, not into someone new, but into the person she was always meant to be, and Keanu knew this was only the beginning. By the time the fourth week of lessons arrived, Lily's music had become something more than progress. It was transformation in sound. Each afternoon her playing grew deeper, fuller, more expressive, as if her heart had found a new vocabulary. Hartman often paused mid-lesson just to watch her hands move, marveling at how someone so young could carry so much truth in her fingertips. Keanu noticed it too. He saw how her confidence no longer flickered like a candle threatened by the wind. It glowed steadily now, small, but certain, lighting a path she had once been too afraid to imagine. One evening, after a particularly emotional practice, Hartman asked Lily to play River Flows in You, a piece he had introduced only a few days earlier. She inhaled deeply, positioning her hands with care, and began. The first notes emerged soft and trembling, but within moments they settled into something breathtaking. Her body swayed slightly with each phrase, her breathing synced with the rhythm. Her fingers painted each melody line with a tenderness that felt raw and luminous. Keanu watched from the corner, unable to look away. There was something different about this performance, something that reached past skill or technique. It felt like the sound of a child opening the door to her own soul. By the time she reached the final lingering notes, Keanu felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't expected. Even Hartman didn't speak for several seconds, as though breaking the silence would undo something sacred. When Lily turned her face toward them with a shy question about whether she had done well, Keanu realized the world needed to hear her. Not someday. Now. He didn't tell her what he was thinking. He didn't want to give her dreams she might think were too big for her to carry. Instead, after she left with her parents, Keanu approached Hartman and asked if he could record the next session. The professor agreed immediately, understanding what Keanu was planning without needing details. He said Lily deserved to be heard by more than the walls of an old apartment. The next day, Keanu set up his phone quietly in the corner before Lily arrived. She sensed a slight change in the room, but assumed it was a new arrangement of furniture. When she played River Flows in You, again, the emotion in her performance was even stronger. There was vulnerability in the way she pressed into the keys, determination in the way her hands lifted lightly between phrases, and a kind of innocence in the way she shaped the final note like a whispered goodbye. Keanu didn't breathe until the recording ended. That same evening, after dropping Lily off and ensuring she was safely inside, he sat in his car and replayed the recording. Listening to it alone was even more powerful. It wasn't just skill, it was a story told through sound, a child's story. A story of darkness and hope, fear and longing, resilience and quiet bravery. The kind of story that could touch anyone who heard it. He visited the website for America's Most Talented Kids, the competition Lily once believed was only for children unlike her. He filled out the form, carefully attaching the recording. In the section for additional notes, he wrote only that the young pianist had taught herself by touch with no formal training. When the form asked for the name of the person submitting the audition, he typed his own name, then deleted it. He didn't want her opportunity tied to him. He wanted her talent to stand alone. He wrote instead, a family friend. Then he clicked submit. For the first time since meeting Lily, he felt nervous. Not because he doubted her, but because he wanted the world to see what he saw every day. The week after he submitted the audition felt strangely long. Keanu checked his email more than he cared to admit, hoping for some sign from the producers, some confirmation that they had heard what he heard in Lily's music. He reminded himself that competitions received thousands of submissions, that responses took time, but patience came harder than expected. Every day he saw Lily grow, and every day he wished the world could witness it too. Then, one quiet afternoon, an unfamiliar number flashed across his phone. He stepped outside before answering, pacing the small sidewalk with a rising sense of anticipation. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a producer from America's Most Talented Kids. Her voice carried a kind of stunned excitement, the kind that signaled something unusual. She said they had reviewed the submission multiple times. She said that most children showed promise or training or charm, but very few carried the emotional weight they had heard in Lily's performance. She asked how long Lily had been studying. When Keanu told her the truth that she had no formal lessons before the past month, the producer went silent for a moment. Then she said they wanted Lily at the live auditions, not as a maybe, as a priority. Keanu thanked her, but he asked one thing in return. He asked that his involvement stay private. He didn't want Lily overshadowed by his name. He wanted her to walk into that audition on her own merit, her own music, her own courage. The producer agreed without hesitation, promising confidentiality. When the call ended, Keanu just stood there for a moment, letting the news settle. A swell of relief washed through him, mixed with pride and something tender he didn't quite have a name for. He thought of Lily, standing on a real stage, her hands finding the keys with the same trembling honesty she carried everywhere. She deserved this chance more than any child he had ever met. At Lily's next lesson, he couldn't hide the emotion in his voice. She sensed it immediately. She asked if something had happened, her head tilting slightly, her brows knitting with concern. Keanu knelt beside her so she could turn toward the sound of his words. He told her she had been chosen for the live auditions. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then her breath caught, and she broke into tears. The kind that come not from sadness, but from a hope too big to carry alone. She lunged forward and hugged him with all the strength in her small body, burying her face against his shoulder. In that moment, she believed for the first time that her music could take her somewhere she once thought unreachable. The days leading up to the audition felt like a quiet storm building around Lily. She didn't talk about nerves the way other children did. She carried them silently, holding them in her posture in the way her fingers twisted together during breaks in the soft tremor of her breathing when she thought no one was paying attention. But she showed up to every lesson with the same determination she had carried from the first day. If anything, she pushed herself harder now. The opportunity felt unreal, like something she didn't want to touch too quickly in case it disappeared. Professor Hartman sensed the shift immediately and adjusted their lessons with care. He didn't bombard her with new techniques. Instead, he focused on giving her the tools she would need once she walked onto the stage. He showed her how to find her seat using the curve of the piano bench. He taught her how to rest her hands lightly along the keyboard to center herself before the first note. He explained how to breathe deeply when the silence of an audience pressed too heavily on her chest. And each day he reminded her that the music she carried inside her mattered more than the judgment of anyone watching. Lily practiced each instruction with quiet intensity, repeating movements until they felt like muscle memory. She tilted her head toward every sound, mapping the room through echoes and vibrations. She learned to count the steps from backstage to the piano. She learned how to pause before beginning, not to show confidence, but to gather her courage. Hartman corrected her gently when needed, praising her progress more often than she expected. She still flushed every time he complimented her, still lowered her head, as if unsure she deserved such words. Keanu visited in the evenings to help her prepare for the parts Hartman couldn't teach. He recreated the stage layout in the professor's apartment, using chairs, books, and anything else they could find. He described everything from the height of the keys to the chill of the backstage air. He told her about the silence before the first note, the way a large audience breathes together when they anticipate something meaningful. Lily listened to every detail, storing them in her mind like landmarks she would need to navigate later. Together, they rehearsed the walk to the piano again and again. Keanu tapped lightly on the floor so she knew which direction to face. He guided her hand when she needed reassurance, but stepped back once she found her bearings. When she hesitated, he encouraged her. When she doubted herself, he steadied her with his calm presence. He knew how hard she was pushing herself, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to honor the trust he and Hartman had given her. Some nights she practiced until her fingers ached. She never complained. She massaged her hands, quietly shook out the tension, and sat back down again. Her determination was bigger than her fear, even if she didn't see it that way. At home, her parents tried to be supportive despite their exhaustion. They made sure she slept well. They made sure she ate enough. They still didn't fully understand the scale of what was coming, but they understood that Lily's life was changing, and they were grateful someone had given her a chance they never could have afforded. By the end of the third night of practice, Keanu noticed something subtle and powerful. Lily no longer asked whether she belonged on that stage. She only asked how she could be ready for it. And that was the beginning of her transformation into someone braver than she realized. As the audition date drew closer, Lily's emotions grew more complicated. She still arrived at lessons eager to learn, still pressed her hands to the piano with that same quiet devotion, but anxiety occasionally slipped through the cracks. Sometimes she paused mid-scale, her fingers hovering just above the keys, as if she had forgotten how to begin. Other times, she sat very still, listening to the hum of the room with a faraway expression, as though imagining the theater she had never stepped inside. Keanu noticed every small shift. After one lesson, as they walked toward the building's exit, Lily finally spoke the worry she had been hiding. She asked whether the world would accept a girl who couldn't see it. Her voice trembled not with self-pity, but with the fear that once she stood before the cameras and judges, her blindness would become all people noticed. She wondered aloud if audiences would think her talent was just sympathy, not skill. She asked whether she deserved the stage at all. Keanu knelt so she could turn fully toward the sound of his voice. He told her gently that some people go through life seeing everything and understanding nothing, while others see with their hearts before they ever see with their eyes. He said she belonged on that stage because she earned it with every note she played, with every hour she practiced, with every ounce of truth she poured into her music. Her blindness was not a burden. It was simply one part of who she was. The rest of her, the courage, the sensitivity, the raw honesty, was what made her extraordinary. Lily listened, her breathing shaky at first, then steadier as his words sank in. She whispered that she was still afraid. Keanu told her that bravery wasn't the absence of fear. Bravery was showing up anyway. She let out a small sigh, almost a release, and nodded. She reached for his hand, not for reassurance this time, but in gratitude. That evening, she practiced with renewed determination. Her fingers found the keys with purpose. Her posture straightened with quiet resolve. She played not as a child hoping to be enough, but as someone preparing to share something real with the world. And for the first time, she looked ready for the biggest night of her life. Backstage on the night of the competition, the world felt louder than Lily expected. She sat between Keanu and Professor Hartman on a long black bench pushed against the wall, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the faint thrum of the stage through the floorboards, each vibration rolling up through her shoes like a distant heartbeat. Voices bounced around the backstage hallway. Some children laughed loudly, others practiced short bursts of their routines, tapping, humming, reciting lines. Lily listened to every detail, not with her ears alone, but with the sensitivity she had learned from music. She absorbed the spaces between sounds, the tremble of anticipation, the hush of fear hidden behind forced excitement. She knew she didn't sound like them. She wasn't bouncing or chattering. She sat still, letting the chaos settle into patterns she could understand. Keanu stayed beside her without moving much. He knew she didn't need jokes or pep talks. She just needed presence. Every few minutes, she leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder touching his arm, grounding herself in the familiarity of his quiet strength. Professor Hartman sat on her other side, offering occasional reminders about where the piano would be positioned and how many steps she would take before reaching the bench. Lily nodded each time, committing everything to memory, but her hands continued to tremble. The curtains on the far end of the backstage area glowed faintly lit by the powerful stage lights on the other side. The light didn't spill through completely, but it created a warm halo around the edges, a reminder of the world waiting for her just beyond the curtain. Lily tilted her head toward it, listening to the echo of clapping whenever a contestant finished their performance. Each burst of applause made her hands tense a little more. A small boy juggling neon-colored balls practiced nearby, dropping one every few seconds. Two sisters in matching dresses rehearsed a harmony they kept forgetting. A boy with a yo-yo clicked it rhythmically against the floor. None of them noticed Lily's stillness. None of them sensed how she listened to the entire room, as if memorizing each breath, each vibration, each fragment of sound. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her back. She inhaled slowly, allowing the familiar calm to wash through her. She asked him how many contestants were ahead of her. He told her she was fifth. She nodded and returned to silence. Even though she couldn't see the other children, she could feel their movement. She could sense their excitement, their nerves, their parents adjusting jackets and fixing hair. Somewhere across the room, she heard a girl crying softly until someone whispered encouragement in her ear. Lily's chest tightened for a moment. She understood that fear well. She had lived with it for years, but she also knew something she didn't know. Back then, she wasn't alone tonight. As the fourth contestant finished and the applause faded into murmurs, the stage manager walked briskly toward them with a clipboard in hand. His footsteps were quick and sharp, a pattern Lily recognized instantly. He stopped in front of her, called her name, and told her she would be on stage in 1 minute. Her breath hitched, her hands froze, the sounds around her blurred for a moment into a single rushing wave. Keanu leaned closer, feeling the shift in her posture. Lily whispered that she wished she could see his face just once. She wished she could see whether he believed she could do this. Her voice cracked in a way that pierced straight through him. Keanu took her hands gently, warming her trembling fingers between his. He told her she didn't need to see his face. She could hear everything she needed in the way he breathed, in the steadiness of his heartbeat, in the quiet certainty he had carried from the moment he met her. He said belief wasn't something you saw, it was something you felt. Her breathing steadied. The stage manager called her name again. This time, she didn't freeze. With Keanu's confidence wrapped around her like a shield, she rose to her feet. Lily stood slowly, feeling the trembling return to her knees, but she didn't try to hide it. She let herself lean into Keanu for a moment, absorbing the steadiness in his presence. Hartman stood as well, adjusting her posture with gentle hands, reminding her to lift her chin, breathe deeply, and trust the map she had built in her mind over the past month. Lily nodded, absorbing every word, even as her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. The stage manager approached again, softer this time, sensing her fear. He told her the edge of the curtain was only a few steps away and that he would guide her until Keanu and Hartman had to stop. She thanked him in a small voice, gripping the air before Keanu placed her hand in his. Together, they walked toward the curtain's glow, each step a quiet battle between fear and courage. As they approached the threshold, the sounds of the auditorium became clearer. Lily heard the fading applause, the shuffle of audience members adjusting in their seats, the faint hum of anticipation drifting through the rows. She imagined the large space, the lights, the height of the ceiling, The sea of strangers, waiting to hear something they didn't yet know they needed. She swallowed hard. Keanu squeezed her hand one last time. He told her that whatever happened out there, her courage was already larger than the stage itself. Hartman echoed the sentiment, his voice steady and warm, promising that she carried more than talent, she carried truth. Lily felt both of their voices settle into her like a steady pulse. The stage manager touched her elbow lightly. It was time. Lily inhaled deeply, letting the breath fill her with everything Keanu and Hartman had given her, belief, strength, and the right to take up space. She straightened her posture, nodded once, and allowed herself to be led forward. The curtain parted. Warm light spilled across her face. And with her heart racing and her hands trembling, Lily stepped onto the stage. The moment Lily stepped onto the stage, the entire auditorium shifted. The air grew still, the soft murmur of the audience faded into silence, and hundreds of faces turned toward the small girl moving slowly into the light. She couldn't see the way people leaned forward in their seats, nor the way the judges exchanged curious glances. But she could feel the size of the room in the vibration under her feet. She could feel the warmth of the lights pressing gently against her skin. She could feel her own heartbeat filling the hollow space inside her chest. The stage manager guided her hand until it brushed the edge of the piano bench. Lily inhaled deeply and reached for the seat, adjusting it just the way Professor Hartman had taught her. One hand slid across the smooth wooden surface. The other gently traced the keys before settling into the starting position she had practiced countless times. Her breathing steadied, her shoulders relaxed. The map she had memorized in her mind became real beneath her fingertips. In the first row, a few audience members glanced at one another, unsure of what they were witnessing. A child walking onto the stage with closed, unfocused eyes, hands trembling slightly, no parent by her side. No introduction about her background, only a brief line from the host saying she had overcome challenges to be here. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't elaborate. It was simple, and it carried a weight that made the room lean into the silence, as if afraid to break it. Backstage, Keanu stood hidden behind a curtain, watching her silhouette brighten in the stage lights. His hands were clasped behind his back so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. He felt every breath she took as if it were his own. Every step she had taken to reach this point played through his mind: the morning in the fog, the trembling hands on the park piano, the shy hope she carried when he first called himself her uncle. He wished he could whisper encouragement into her ear now, but he knew she didn't need his words. She needed her own voice. Professor Hartman stood beside him, posture straight, eyes wet with quiet pride. He whispered to Keanu that this moment belonged to her alone. Keanu nodded, though his chest ached with the desire to run out and hold her hand. But this was her bravery, not his. His role was to believe in her, not to shield her. On stage, Lily lifted her chin and took one final breath. She placed her fingers on the keys and let the silence settle into her body. The judges watched closely. One leaned forward, another folded her hands. They did not know what to expect from the small blind girl sitting so still at the piano. Then Lily pressed the first note. It rang out clear and soft, shimmering through the auditorium with a purity that startled the room into deeper silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was delicate, trembling with emotion, yet confident enough to claim the space around it. A few people in the audience exhaled without meaning to. The judges exchanged quick glances. They had heard thousands of auditions, but something in that single note vibrated differently. Backstage, Keanu felt his heart leap as though someone had pulled a string inside him. He had heard her play this piece 100 times, but hearing her on a real stage, surrounded by strangers waiting to judge her, made the sound feel entirely new. Lily let her hands settle deeper onto the keys. Her shoulders relaxed again. And with her heart pounding, her breath steady, and the world waiting in silence, she moved into the next notes. As Lily moved into the heart of the piece, her fingers found their rhythm with an ease that felt almost unreal. The stage lights warmed her face, but the rest of the world faded into a kind of soft, invisible space. She no longer felt the weight of the audience or the uncertainty of the judges. All she felt was the familiar shape of the keys beneath her fingertips and the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Each note carried a piece of her story, breaking open the silence that had once trapped her dreams. She played delicately at first, almost whispering the melody, but as the music grew, so did her courage. Her hands moved with growing confidence, painting the air with the emotions she had tucked away for years. The judges, who initially didn't know what to expect, slowly leaned forward in their chairs. One placed a hand over her heart. Another closed his eyes to listen more deeply. It was clear that this performance wasn't about skill alone. It was something far more personal. The audience shifted, mesmerized. Phones lowered. Conversations ceased. Even the restless children in the crowd grew quiet, drawn in by the fragile power of each note. Lily's hair fell slightly over her face as she swayed gently with the music, unaware of how many lives she was touching in that moment. She didn't need to see the audience to feel that they were listening. She could sense it in the hush that wrapped around her like a protective shell. Backstage, Keanu struggled to breathe evenly. He had watched her grow, watched her fight for every ounce of progress, watched her step into a world that once terrified her. Seeing her now seated under the lights, with hundreds of strangers hanging on every sound she created, filled him with a pride so overwhelming it hurt. Hartman stood beside him, whispering that what they were witnessing wasn't just talent, it was truth. Lily reached the final section, her fingers moving with a grace that belonged only to her. She shaped the ending the way Hartman had taught her, letting the last note linger softly before lifting her hands. The sound shimmered through the room and slowly dissolved into silence. For a moment, no one moved, and then the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The moment Lily lifted her hands from the keys, the final note hovered in the air, like a fragile piece of light refusing to fade. It lingered with an almost sacred stillness, stretching across the auditorium, until even the smallest sound felt intrusive. No one clapped, no one breathed too loudly. The stillness wasn't confusion, it was reverence, the kind that rises when something pure passes through a room and leaves it changed. Lily kept her eyes down, not because she was nervous, but because she was listening. She could feel the shape of the silence, the way it wrapped around her instead of pressing down on her. It was a silence she recognized, the same kind that filled the park on early mornings, the same kind that sat beside her when she played for herself alone. But now it was bigger. It carried the weight of hundreds of people holding their breath. In the front row, a mother reached for a tissue without realizing she was already crying. Her teenage son stared at Lily as if he had just witnessed something impossible, his mouth slightly open. A backstage assistant peeked through the curtain and blinked rapidly, her hand covering her heart. She whispered to a cameraman beside her that she had never heard a child play with that much emotion, not in all the years she had worked there. Even the judges, seasoned and often unmoved by nervous young performers, sat in stunned silence. The first judge leaned so far forward, her elbows rested on the table, her eyes glistening. The second judge, usually stern, softened her shoulders and exhaled slowly as if releasing a breath she didn't know she was holding. The third judge, known for his technical precision, didn't write a single note during the performance. He simply watched, his brows drawn together in disbelief over how a child could shape a melody with such emotional gravity. Backstage, other contestants were frozen where they stood. A young magician forgot to lower the cards in his hand. A dancer paused mid-stretch. A violinist slowly lowered her instrument, unable to look away from the monitor, showing Lily's silhouette seated at the piano. One boy, older than Lily, and confident in his own routine, stared so intently at the screen that he didn't notice his mouth hanging open. Lily, unaware of all the eyes on her, kept her hands hovering above the keyboard for a few seconds longer, just as Hartman had taught her. She breathed in softly, grounding herself in the moment. The silence became a soft hum beneath her ribs, steady and warm. For the first time in her life, standing or sitting on a stage didn't feel like a spotlight burning through her insecurities. It felt like a place she belonged. Halfway backstage, Keanu pressed a hand against the wall to steady himself. He had seen Lily practice until her fingers throbbed. He had watched her fight nerves that could swallow a child whole. He had watched her build confidence note by note, breath by breath. But he had never heard her play like this, not even in Hartman's apartment, not even in her most emotional rehearsals. This was different. This was Lily, without fear. Professor Hartman wiped at his eyes. He didn't try to hide it. He whispered quietly that she had found the emotional core of the piece in a way most adult pianists never could. He said she wasn't playing from memory. She was playing from truth. Still, the audience remained frozen. Lily shifted, slightly confused for a moment, unsure whether the silence meant she had done something wrong. She tilted her head, listening for cues, the breath of a judge, the rustle of an audience member, anything. But all she heard was stillness, stretching outward like an embrace. And then the world finally inhaled. The applause erupted so suddenly that Lily flinched. It crashed through the silence like a wave breaking against the shore, powerful and overwhelming. For a brief moment, she didn't understand what was happening. Then she felt the vibration of hundreds of hands striking together, rolling across the room in a trembling echo that reached her chest. She straightened instinctively, her fingers curling gently as if holding on to the last note she had played. The audience rose to their feet in one sweeping motion. Chairs scraped softly. People wiped their faces, still stunned by the depth of emotion they had witnessed. A mother in the fourth row reached for her daughter and whispered that she had never heard anything so beautiful. A teenage boy who rarely showed emotion found himself blinking back tears he couldn't explain. A young musician backstage lowered his violin and whispered that he needed to practice harder if a 12-year-old could play like that. Lily listened to everything. She heard the tearful laughter. She heard a judge breathe out a shaky sigh. She heard someone whisper that this performance would be remembered for years. She didn't see the standing ovation, but she felt it in the tremors beneath the stage and in the warmth lifting from the audience like a collective exhale. Backstage, Keanu pressed a hand to his chest. He felt the impact of the applause as if it were directed at him, yet he knew it belonged entirely to her. Pride surged through him with a force he hadn't expected, mingling with the same tenderness he felt the day he first heard her play in the park. Professor Hartman stood beside him, shoulders lifted with joy, whispering that this was the moment he had always known she was capable of reaching. On stage, Lily bowed gently, unsure if she was doing it right, but wanting to show her gratitude. The applause grew louder, encouraging her. Her lips trembled into a soft smile. For the first time, she believed she deserved to be standing there. The stage manager touched her elbow, guiding her back toward the wings as the audience continued clapping. Lily followed the familiar steps she had practiced, the vibrations of applause following her like a guiding rhythm. As she crossed behind the curtain, the noise faded slightly, but the warmth of it stayed with her. She had held the world still, and now the world had finally seen her. As Lily stepped back into the warm glow of backstage, the applause still echoing faintly behind her, the stage manager guided her toward a small waiting area beside the judge's table. Her heart was still racing. The vibrations of the cheers still pulsed softly through her palms. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself of Hartman's lessons, but the magnitude of the moment pressed around her like a gentle storm. When the studio lights shifted, she recognized the cue that the judges were ready to speak with her. The stage manager touched her elbow again and led her back into the light. The audience quieted instantly. The judges sat forward in their chairs, still visibly moved. Lily stood behind the microphone, fingers clasped in front of her, listening to the way the room settled into silence once more. The first judge spoke softly, as if careful not to break the spell. She asked Lily how she learned to play with such emotional depth at such a young age. Lily hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she explained simply that she learned by feeling the keys, by memorizing the distances, by listening to the world in vibrations and tonal colors. She said she imagined the music as shapes she could follow in her mind. The audience murmured in awe. The second judge leaned in. She asked Lily if she had ever taken lessons before this year. Lily shook her head faintly. She said she taught herself at first because her parents worked long hours and they didn't have the money for a piano or a teacher. She said she memorized recordings from the library and practiced whenever she could find a public piano. The judge pressed her hand to her chest, visibly touched. The third judge, known for his technical scrutiny, asked who had been helping her recently. He wanted to know who had trained her hands to play with such refined control. He wanted to know who had shaped her into a musician, capable of holding a room silent with a single note. Lily paused, lifting her face slightly as if searching the air. Her lips curled into a small smile. She didn't hesitate. She said she had been studying with someone who believed in her before she believed in herself. Someone who taught her not just music, but courage. Someone who stayed beside her when the world felt too big. Then she said the sentence that would echo around the studio, the internet, and the country long after the episode aired. She said in a soft but steady voice that her teacher was Uncle Keanu Reeves. The studio erupted instantly. Gasps burst through the audience. People stood up from their seats, craning their necks to see if they had heard correctly. A wave of whispers shot across the room. The judges exchanged wide-eyed looks, unsure whether they had misunderstood her words. Even the host blinked several times, stunned into silence. Backstage, Keanu froze. His breath caught. His eyes closed on instinct, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion he hadn't expected. He had taken every step to stay anonymous, wanting her talent to shine without the shadow of his name. But hearing Lily say his name with such confidence, such gratitude, made warmth surge through his chest in a way he couldn't contain. He wished she hadn't revealed him, but at the same time he had never felt more honored in his life. The host stepped forward, trying to regain composure as the audience buzzed with excitement. He asked Lily gently if she meant the Keanu Reeves. Lily tilted her head toward the sound of his voice, calm and sincere, and said yes. She said it as if she were mentioning a family friend, not a world-famous figure whose name carried enough weight to shake an entire studio. The audience reacted instantly, voices rising in stunned disbelief. One judge placed both hands on the table, leaning forward eagerly. She asked Lily how she met him. Lily explained that they met in the park one morning when she was practicing on a public piano. She described his voice as kind, patient, and warm. She said he listened to her play before ever saying his name, and that he offered to help her find someone who could teach her properly. She said she didn't even know he was famous until much later. The audience let out a collective sound, part awe, part admiration for Keanu's humility. Another judge pressed her palms together under her chin, visibly emotional. She asked Lily what she meant when she said he believed in her before she believed in herself. Lily's smile trembled, soft but full of truth. She said that before she met Keanu, she didn't think her dreams belonged to her. She thought they were too expensive, too unreachable, too big for a girl who couldn't see. She said Keanu didn't just tell her she could do it, he made her feel it. She said he spoke to her like her music was a gift, not a burden. Not once did he let her apologize for who she was. The audience quieted again, listening to her words as if they were a part of the performance itself. Backstage, Keanu's throat tightened. He wasn't someone who cried easily in public, but hearing Lily speak with such honesty tore through the defenses he usually kept around his emotions. He had helped her because he believed in kindness, in quiet intervention, in lifting someone up when life had pushed them down too many times. He never wanted his name attached to her success. But Lily didn't mention him to make him visible. She mentioned him because to her, he wasn't a celebrity, he was the person who showed up when she needed someone most. Professor Hartman placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. He whispered that Lily spoke about him the way children speak about their heroes. Keanu lowered his head, humbled beyond words. Back on stage, the judges gathered themselves. One judge told Lily her performance was already unforgettable, but her story, her honesty, her strength, and the bond she described made it even more powerful. She told Lily that belief like that could carry someone through the hardest moments in life. Lily nodded and said quietly that she hoped the world would hear her music the way Keanu did. In that moment, the room softened. The lights seemed warmer. Even the audience held themselves differently, as if they had all witnessed something sacred. Lily had played a beautiful song, but her truth was what held the world still. The audience was already buzzing with emotion after Lily's stunning performance and the revelation of who had guided her. But when the host announced that Keanu Reeves was actually backstage, the energy inside the studio shifted like a wave rolling across the sea. People gasped. Some stood immediately. Others clapped on instinct, as if the very mention of his presence demanded respect. A warm roar spread through the crowd building with each passing second, rising into cheers that echoed against the walls of the studio. Parents lifted their phones to record the moment. Teenagers jumped to their feet, shouting that they loved him. Older audience members nodded with recognition, touched by the idea that someone so famous had chosen to help a child in silence. The applause didn't just grow, it deepened. It carried gratitude, admiration, and a kind of awe that only surfaces when people witness genuine goodness. Behind the curtain, Keanu hesitated. He had stayed hidden on purpose so Lily could shine without the shadow of his fame. But when the judges asked to meet him and the audience continued calling for him, he knew stepping out wasn't about attention. It was about standing beside the girl who had just poured her entire heart into a song. It was about giving her one more moment of reassurance in a world that often felt too large for her. He stepped forward quietly. No dramatic entrance, no showmanship, just a gentle, steady walk toward the light of the stage. As soon as he appeared, the entire studio erupted. People clapped so hard their hands stung. A few even cried, overwhelmed not by celebrity worship, but by the story that had just unfolded, a story of kindness, talent, and unexpected connection. Keanu didn't wave or smile theatrically. He simply offered a small nod as he approached Lily. She was still standing by the piano bench, breathing unevenly after the emotional high of performing. She could feel the vibrations of the crowd through the floor, and it made her nervous all over again. Before she could drown in the noise, Keanu reached her side and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Instantly, her body relaxed. She turned toward him with instinctive trust, leaning into the familiar calm that always surrounded him. She didn't need to see him to know it was him. "Uncle," she whispered, barely audible through the applause. "I'm here," he answered softly. The audience melted at the exchange. Some placed their hands over their hearts, others wiped away tears. The judges watched with expressions that blended admiration and awe, touched by the bond between the man and the child in front of them. One judge stepped forward with a gentle smile. She said she had seen many talented performers over the years, but rarely had she seen someone whose belief in another person changed the performance itself. She told Lily her music was extraordinary, but she told Keanu that his humility added a depth to the moment that no television show could ever script. Keanu shook his head modestly. He said he didn't do anything remarkable. He said Lily had always carried this gift. He only helped carve a small path for it to grow. The judge responded that sometimes creating a path for someone else is the most remarkable thing of all. He didn't argue. He didn't step toward the spotlight. He stayed beside Lily, letting her hold on to him while the crowd continued their endless applause. Because for him, this moment wasn't about recognition. It was about standing with a child whose courage had filled a silent world with music. The applause softened only when the judges stood, signaling they wanted to speak again. The studio slowly grew quieter, though the excitement pulsed like electricity. One of the judges, a man known for tough critiques, addressed Lily first. He told her that her performance had reminded him why he became a musician, and then he added that her courage would inspire millions of kids who felt overlooked or underestimated. Lily lowered her head shyly, still gripping Keanu's hand for strength. Another judge turned toward Keanu. She said the world often celebrates loud heroes, the ones who stand in the center of attention, but people rarely acknowledge the silent heroes who change lives without expecting anything back. She explained that Lily's growth wasn't just the product of talent. It came from someone who created space for that talent to bloom. She thanked him, and the crowd followed with soft applause. Keanu shifted uncomfortably, not out of embarrassment, but because he didn't feel like the praise belonged to him. He looked at Lily, who stood small and radiant beside him, and he insisted she was the one who had done the hard work. He said all he did was show up. He said most dreams grow not because someone pushes them, but because someone believes they can. A third judge asked Lily what she wanted to do next. The question made her tense for a moment. She said quietly that she didn't know, because she never thought life would offer her something this big. She added that if she ever stood on a stage again, she hoped people would hear her heart, even if they couldn't see her. Her voice trembled, but the determination beneath it shone clearly. Before the judges could respond, the audience burst into another wave of applause. It wasn't as loud as before, but it was warmer. It was the kind of applause usually reserved for someone who had revealed something true, not just entertaining. The host approached gently and asked Keanu if he had anything he wanted to share with the viewers. He took a moment, choosing his words with care. He said the world becomes brighter when we help someone else shine. He said kindness is not a performance, but a responsibility, and that Lily had taught him more about courage in 1 month than he'd learned in years. The room fell silent again, responding to the sincerity in his voice. Lily squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, grounding her in the calm she trusted. Standing there together, they weren't actor and prodigy. They were simply two souls whose paths had crossed at the exact moment both needed a reason to believe in something bigger. And everyone in the room felt the truth of that connection. The days after the performance felt unreal for Lily and her family. Their small apartment, usually filled only with the soft hum of old appliances and the quiet shuffle of daily routines, suddenly buzzed with phone calls, messages, and unexpected visitors. Her parents didn't understand most of it at first. They didn't know how the world had embraced their daughter overnight. They only knew something extraordinary had happened, something bigger than anything they had dared to dream for her. Her mother kept repeating that Lily had always had music in her fingertips, even before anyone taught her. Her father kept wiping his eyes whenever someone mentioned the performance, overwhelmed by pride he wasn't used to showing. For years they had worked long hours, cleaning office buildings and grocery stores, believing the best they could offer their daughter was love, safety, and meals on the table. Now the world was offering her opportunities they had never imagined. Music academies called first. Some offered evaluations. Some offered full scholarships. Others offered to create special programs tailored to her needs. They used words like exceptional, prodigious, breathtaking. Lily listened to them carefully, but she didn't cling to any promise. She knew promises meant nothing unless people kept them. She had learned that truth early in life, but this time she wasn't leaning on promises. She was leaning on something stronger. She was leaning on the belief someone had planted in her and helped her grow. Journalists tried to reach her next. They wanted interviews about her life, her blindness, her talent, her connection to Keanu. Some wanted inspirational stories. Others wanted dramatic angles. They didn't understand that Lily wasn't chasing attention. She was chasing the feeling music gave her, the feeling of living in a world she could shape, even though she couldn't see it. Keanu knew this. He watched the sudden interest swirl around her family like a storm building in the distance. He made sure to shield them where he could. He advised her parents to take things slowly, to think about Lily's future instead of the noise surrounding her present. He helped them answer calls, guided them through offers, and reminded them that fame could lift someone up just as easily as it could swallow them. They trusted him implicitly, not because of who he was to the world, but because of the quiet sincerity he carried in every word. Professor Hartman remained steady through the chaos. He insisted that Lily keep practicing as if nothing had changed. He reminded her that technique mattered as much as passion, and discipline mattered as much as talent. His apartment became a sanctuary again. No cameras, no crowds, just a piano, a mentor, and a girl rediscovering her center. Lily appreciated that more than she could express. She told Keanu during one visit that the world sounded different now. She said she could hear opportunity in the tone of people's voices, hope in the way strangers spoke her name and possibility in every footstep that approached her door. But she also said something else, something softer. She said that even with all the noise, she could still feel the calm of that morning in the park, the moment he believed in her before she believed in herself. And that memory kept her grounded. It kept her grateful. It kept her whole. Lily's life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were still simple. She still woke to the soft hum of her family's apartment, still reached for the piano keys. Before breakfast, still counted the steps to the kitchen by memory. But everything around her felt brighter in a way she couldn't fully describe. She said it felt like she could sense color in the air now, like her world had expanded, even though her eyesight hadn't changed. Her parents tried their best to keep life ordinary. They still packed lunches. They still reminded her to rest her fingers. They still argued softly about bills at the table. But now, when they whispered about the future, there was hope woven into their voices instead of worry. They wondered where her music might take her. They wondered how far she would go. They wondered what doors might open that had once been locked. When Keanu visited, he always knocked lightly, never wanting to intrude. Lily could recognize him instantly, not by the sound of his footsteps, but by the calm that settled around him. Sometimes he brought her Braille books about famous musicians who had overcome hardships. Sometimes he brought recordings of classical performances she had never heard. Sometimes he brought nothing at all, choosing simply to sit nearby while she played. Those moments became her favorite. She told him that playing for him made her feel like the music had a destination, like each note traveled somewhere meaningful. He told her that listening to her reminded him there was still goodness in the world, even when life tried to convince people otherwise. Neither of them needed to say more. Professor Hartman remained a constant presence. His lessons became more advanced as Lily grew stronger in technique and expression. He taught her how to push emotion through dynamics, how to interpret a composition rather than simply perform it, how to trust her instincts even when she doubted her skill. He often said she was growing faster than any student he had ever mentored. One afternoon, as Keanu sat quietly in the corner of the professor's apartment, he watched Lily play a new piece with a confidence he had never seen before. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't questioning herself. She wasn't shrinking from mistakes. She moved with purpose, with grace, with certainty. Her hands felt like they belonged to someone far older, someone who had lived enough pain to understand the weight of every note. When she finished, she turned her head in Keanu's direction immediately. She didn't need to see him to sense his pride. He stood and walked to her side, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. She smiled and told him she wasn't scared of stages anymore. She wasn't scared of crowds. She wasn't scared of being seen. She said she had spent so long living in darkness that she didn't realize how much light she could create on her own. And Keanu, who knew too well what it meant to carry sorrow, quietly felt a part of himself heal each time she spoke that truth aloud. Keanu returned to the park a few evenings after the competition. The sun was setting behind the trees, turning the sky into soft shades of rose and blue. The same path he had jogged for years stretched out in front of him. The same benches stood in their familiar places. And there, standing silently under the maple tree, was the old public piano that had changed everything. Its paint was still chipped. A few keys were still uneven. The wood was worn from years of weather fingerprints and forgotten melodies. Nothing about it looked remarkable. Yet to Keanu, it had become the place where a whole new chapter began. He walked toward it slowly, feeling the quiet of the park wrap around him like a blanket. When he reached the bench, he sat down and rested his hands on his knees. For a while, he said nothing. He simply listened to the wind move through the branches above him. He remembered the morning he first heard Lily playing in this exact spot. He remembered the trembling notes of Chopin filling the fog-filled air. He remembered stopping mid-step because something in her music spoke a truth he recognized. A truth about loneliness, a truth about courage, a truth about a child who carried more light than she realized. Keanu smiled softly as the memory settled over him. He had not planned any of it. He had not intended to intervene in anyone's life that day. He had only been out for a morning jog, the same routine he followed countless times before. But life has a way of placing the right people in front of you at the exact moment you are meant to meet them. Lily had been one of those moments, a moment that quietly rearranged the inside of his heart. He ran his fingers slowly across the edge of the piano. He thought about how talent often hides in the simplest corners of the world, not in grand concert halls or elite academies, but on street corners, in cramped apartments, and under the branches of city parks where no one expects brilliance to bloom. He thought about how many gifted children go unseen because no one stops long enough to listen. Lily had been one of them. A girl with a gift so deep that even without sight she could reveal colors no one else could create. Keanu reflected on the courage it took for her to step into a world that had never made room for her. He thought about how she had played her heart into every note, not to win applause, but to speak in the only language that had ever made sense to her. Music had been her guide, her voice, her way of navigating a world she could not see, but could somehow feel more deeply than most. He leaned back and looked up at the branches overhead. The park was quiet, but the silence felt warm, as if the echoes of Lily's performance still hung in the air. He realized that helping her had done something inside him too. It had reminded him that hope does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it comes from the fingertips of a child at an old piano. Sometimes it begins in moments so small you only recognize their importance much later. As Keanu sat beneath the fading light, he found himself thinking about everything Lily had taught him without meaning to. She had reminded him that bravery does not always appear loud or bold. Sometimes it shows up quietly in a child who places her hands on a piano she cannot see and chooses to trust the world enough to play. Sometimes courage is a whisper that insists on being heard. He remembered the moment she stepped on stage during the competition. She had walked slowly, counting her steps with silent determination. Her fingers had trembled as she positioned herself at the piano bench. But when the first note rose into the air, there had been no fear, only truth, only heart, only a purity that could not be manufactured by fame or training or fortune. Keanu thought about how many people in the studio had cried that night, not because she was blind, not because she was young, but because her music reached inside them and touched a part of their humanity they had forgotten about. People did not stand for her out of sympathy. They stood because she reminded them of the beauty that still exists in the world when someone dares to share the light they carry. He exhaled slowly, feeling the comfort of that thought. For so long he had lived with the weight of his own losses, the shadows of moments he rarely spoke about. But Lily's journey had stirred something soft inside him, the kind of softness he used to feel when life allowed him to witness small miracles, the kind of feeling that reminded him why kindness mattered even when the world made it difficult. He brushed a leaf off the piano lid and let his hand linger on the wood. He realized that if he had not stopped to listen that morning, none of this would have happened. Lily might still be playing here alone, never knowing how extraordinary she was. Her music might have faded into the open air with no witness to carry it forward, and he might have missed one of the most meaningful connections he had made in years. A simple moment. A single pause in his morning routine. That was all it took to change her life, and in a quieter way, his own. It made him think about how easily people overlook the small opportunities to help others, how often people rush past someone who only needs a chance, a hand, a word, or the belief of one person willing to stay when everyone else walks away. Keanu closed his eyes and allowed the memory of Lily's smile to fill him. She no longer spoke with uncertainty. She no longer held her shoulders low. She stood taller now, brighter, freer. She had begun building a future she once thought was impossible simply because someone had told her she deserved to try. As he opened his eyes again, the park around him felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He now saw it as a place where destinies could shift without warning, a place where lives could cross in ways that rewrite entire futures. And he felt grateful, quietly, deeply grateful.